afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the lesson. Sorry that I can't be with you today. As you know, I've got to self-isolate. So all my lessons this week and next week are going to be online. So today's session is all about equality and diversity. I know it's been a few weeks since we all saw each other, but this links in with what we were doing when we were looking at person-centred care before we broke up for the half-term break. So this lesson is a continuation of that. So what we're going to be doing today is looking at equality and diversity and how you can become an anti-discriminatory health and social care worker and how you can promote equality and diversity in your role as a health and social care worker. Now, in the test that you've got for this module, there will be some questions about equality and diversity as well. So it's really important that you do pay attention to this lesson because you might be asked questions about it in the test. Okay, so first of all, I'll just go through what we're going to do today. So the aim of this session is to develop your knowledge and awareness of equality and diversity so that you can gain a further insight of how to work in what we call a non-discriminatory way in health and social care settings. So there's quite a few things I want to do during this video. We're going to differentiate between prejudice and discrimination. So we're going to look at what the difference is between those two terms, and then we'll justify the reason why certain characteristics are protected. So when people are discriminated against or treated differently, it's often because of a particular characteristic that they have. So we will look at the Equality Act and look at what the Equality Act says are protected characteristics. So, i.e. the characteristics that people should not be treated differently because of. So once we've done that, we'll apply the Equality Act to the health and social care sector. So how does it actually relate to your role as a health and social care worker, and how does it impact on the job that you do? And then we're going to start looking at some theory. So we're going to apply Thomson's PCS theory to your own work settings, and then you're going to be set a task to use Gibbs' reflective cycle to guide your reflective practice. So you're going to write a reflective account of how you have worked in a non-discriminatory way. So all that I'll be explaining at the end of the session. Okay, this is a video, so you can pause it whenever you want to. I will be telling you when to pause it to give you some time to do some other little activities, but pause it, rewind it. Try not to fast forward though, I want you to keep up with me, but pause it as and when you need to. Okay, so quick warm-up task. I want you to do a quick written activity for me. So in no more than 50 words, I want you to explain the meaning of equality and diversity. Now, your 50 words need to include the following key terms: equality, diversity, prejudice, discrimination, and oppression. Once you have done this, I want you to upload it to the assignment task that I've set on Teams. Now, I'm aware some of you aren't sure of how to do this, so you can just send it to me as a message on Teams, or you can email it to me, whichever works best for you. Okay, so if you want to just pause the video now, for as long as it takes for you to do those 50 words, and then just come back to me once you've done that. Okay, welcome back everybody. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at some of those key terms that you've just written about in those 50 words. So we're going to start off by looking at what equality is. And remember, you need to be aware of these key terms because you may be asked about them in the test that you're going to be sitting. Okay, so think about it. What is equality? It's a term that we hear all the time. It's a term that we use all the time. But do you actually know what it means? So the picture that I've got on the screen, shows you two key terms: equality and equity. Now, equality is about ensuring that every individual has an equal opportunity to make the most of their lives and their talents. It's also the belief that no one should have poorer life chances because of the way they were born, where they come from, what they believe in, or whether they have a disability. So they are linking in with some of the protected characteristics we're going to be looking at in the Equality Act. So basically, equality is the effect of treating people without differences. So you can see here on that picture, under the equality one, every single person, those three people are all being treated equally, aren't they? They're almost being treated the same. Now, although that's equality, it's not actually providing them with equity, because equity is slightly different to equality, because it refers to treating people fairly in line with their specific needs. So if you think about it, equality could be seen as treating people the same, whereas we all have different needs. So you can see there, those three people are all different heights. So if you treat them all the same, they're all given the same size box. But actually, the smaller person, so the one who is not as tall as the other two, needs a higher box. And so does the middle person. Okay? So what we've actually done there is we've been able to treat them with equity. And they are still going to be achieving the same outcomes as each other. So equality and equity are two very important terms that you need to be aware of. Another term related to equality and diversity is the actual term diversity. Now, you've heard this term so many times, it's bandied about everywhere, left, right, and centre. It literally means variety. Now, think about everybody who lives in society. Even though there are lots of similarities between us all, there are also many differences. So diversity refers to the differences in people that exist in society. And it's important that we celebrate diversity. It's important that we recognise it and we promote it, because it's a good thing for society. If we were all the same, we'd be living in a really boring place. Now, you can see at the bottom of my slides here, I have put names and dates. This is where I've got my information from, if you want to use this for your referencing when you are writing any essays for me. Okay, I just want to let you know as well that I am working at home today, and my dog is sat under the desk and he is snoring his head off. So if you hear any like loud roaring or anything like that, it's my little dog. Okay, so let's now turn our attention to some more key terms. The first one being prejudice, and then the next one being discrimination. So, term prejudice refers to preconceived opinions that are not based on reason or actual experience. So when we are prejudiced, what we're actually doing is we are prejudging something. So we make a decision or we make an assumption about something, but it's not based on actual experiences, or it's not based on fact, it is based on purely what we think. And that is what leads us to treat people in a prejudiced way. So the term discrimination is when we actually act upon our prejudicial views and we treat people unfairly or unequally based on an actual or perceived difference. So we see somebody and we might make an assumption that they are different. We then treat them unfairly or unequally because of that assumption we've made. That then becomes discrimination. Okay, and again, that's from Thompson 2012, Anti-Discriminatory Practice. So there's some more key terms for you: prejudice and discrimination. Now then, another term I want us to look at is oppression. Now, oppression is something that you will hear a lot, but do you actually know what it means? So oppression is the inhuman or degrading treatment of individuals or groups, and it can be hardship and injustice brought about by the dominance of one group over another. So in simple terms, oppression happens when one group of people are treated differently by another group of people, because that group of people feel that they are more powerful than the other group. Sorry about that. I've got all these messages popping up on Teams. Okay, so let's move on to legislation now. So we've looked at some key terms already. I want us to now focus on legislation. So think for a moment about the law. What legislation do you think cover discrimination and promote equality and diversity? So what legislation do you know of that aims to promote equality and diversity and prevent discrimination? So pause this video and write down as many as you can think of. Okay, so on your list you should have the Equality Act. Now the Equality Act came out in 2010. It's a very, very important piece of legislation. It was created, like I said, in 2010, and it brought together 9 really big laws and also about 100 smaller laws that were all focused on equality and diversity and promoting equal rights for people. So rather than having all these hundreds of laws floating about everywhere, the government decided to combine it all into one big act. Hence, the Equality Act was then formed. So, the Equality Act is the main act that you need to be aware of with regards to promoting equality and diversity. So it was created, as I said, to bring together the following acts. So it brought together the Equal Pay Act from 1970. It brought about the Sex Discrimination Act, the Race Relations Act, the Disability Discrimination Act, and various other employment equality acts. Okay, so it brought together these really, really big pieces of legislation, combined it with smaller ones, and then produced the Equality Act. Now, one of the main outcomes of the Equality Act was that it introduced the idea of protected characteristics. So the Act refers to 9 protected characteristics. And what these are things about people that people are more likely to be discriminated against because of. So age discrimination, disability discrimination, treating people differently on the grounds of their gender or their sex, or also their gender reassignment, their marital status, treating women differently during pregnancy and maternity, but also treating fathers differently if they are expecting a child with their female partner. Race, religion or belief, sexual orientation as well. These are all protected characteristics. So these are some of the biggest reasons why people are discriminated against. So the Equality Act aims to try and prevent people discriminating against people and protect these characteristics. Now, in the test, you might be asked to name some of the protected characteristics in the Equality Act. So make sure that you do remember these. Okay, so I want to just pose the question to you now. Sometimes it's okay to discriminate. So remember, discrimination means that you treat people unfairly or unevenly or unequally. So think to yourself for a moment, is it okay to discriminate? Are there any occasions when we can actually discriminate and it's acceptable? What do you think about that? So something that was introduced in the Equality Act was the idea of positive action, and it kind of answers the question that I just posed to everybody about, is it okay to discriminate? So in regards to positive action, the Equality Act allows service providers and employers to take action that might actually involve treating one group more favourably, where there is a proportionate way to help members of that group overcome a disadvantage. So basically, what this means is we can discriminate or we can treat people differently if we feel it is actually going to benefit society as a whole. So let me give you an example, and you can see in these pictures here. With regards to female engineering apprenticeships, in 2002, 4.6 apprenticeships went to males, and then 3.1 in 2015 went to females. So we can see there's a difference there. The same here, and in information technology, 35 females to 186 males. So we might have to discriminate slightly or take positive action to try and equal those figures, because we might want more females to enter into the IT industry, or we might want to get more females into engineering. So what we do is we might focus our attentions more on attracting females to that industry. That is positive action and it is a form of discrimination, but it's acceptable to do that. The same as well if you had, suppose you had a workforce, you had a nursing staff of 12, 10 of those were males and only 2 were females, you might need to balance it out a little bit more. So when you start to recruit further nurses, you might be looking for more female nurses, simply to balance out the numbers. But you've got to be able to justify why you're doing it. Okay, so there's got to be a reason why you're taking that positive action. So that is what positive action is. Okay, just to help you out as well, I've put a link on Teams to an easy read version of the Equality Act. So it basically summarises what the Equality Act is. Have a look over that when you've got some time and just familiarise yourselves with it, because it will come in handy for the test. Okay, so we've looked at the Equality Act. We're now going to look at 2 other forms of legislation. First one is the Human Rights Act, which came into force in 1998. And then there's also the European Convention on Human Rights. This was originally introduced in 1953 and was later updated in 2010. So, with regards to equality and diversity, we know that the Equality Act states that you must not treat people differently, and it lists those 9 characteristics. The Human Rights Act makes it illegal to discriminate on a wide range of grounds, including sex, race, colour, language, religion, political or other opinion. Okay, so this piece of legislation is really, really important as well, because it kind of is the earlier version of the Equality Act, because it says that you can't discriminate against people based on those particular characteristics. Now, it also states that you can't discriminate against people based on other status, and this has been extended to include sexual orientation, legitimacy, marital status, and even things like whether people are a member of a trade union, and also more recently transsexual status and imprisonment. So one of the questions that has been raised quite a lot in contemporary debate is whether or not transgender people, if they were going into prison, would they go into a prison for males or females? So would they go into a prison for their biological birth sex? So for example, if you were transitioning from female to male, would you go into a female prison or would you go into a male prison? So the Human Rights Act has tried to challenge these views. Now, the Human Rights Act, like I said, came out in 1998, and it is based on the European Conventions on Human Rights, and I've abbreviated that to the ECHR, which was updated in 2010. Okay, so remember, Article 14 of the Human Rights Act states that it's illegal to discriminate on these grounds, and this has all come from the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, one of the things that the Human Rights Act does discuss is the concept of hate crimes. Now, this is something that you've probably heard of before. A hate crime is any criminal offence. Now, it could be to a person, so it could be physically, or it could even be to a person's property. Now, that offence needs to be perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on a person's race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, and their transgender status. Okay, so it is actually a criminal offence to harm anybody because of any of those 5 things, and that comes from the Crown Prosecution Service on the government's website. Okay, so we can now see that not only is equality and diversity important, if you don't act in a non-discriminatory way, then you are more than likely going to be breaking the law as well. So it's not just about treating people equally, treating people fairly, treating people with equity. It's about following the law as well. So it's really, really important. So have a think about these issues. Obviously, this is a YouTube video, but have a think about them as I go through them and think about what your thoughts are. So breastfeeding is a private act and shouldn't be done in public. Some people might agree with that. Some people might disagree with that. In the Equality Act, it actually states that women have the legal right to breastfeed their child wherever they want. So if you are a breastfeeding mother and you decide to feed your child in a cafe or a restaurant or in the cinema or anywhere else we can go to, which is a public place, obviously not many at the moment due to COVID restrictions, but a woman is entitled to do that, and she cannot be asked to stop doing that. If she is asked to do that, then the person asking is actually breaking the Equality Act, so it's illegal. The trans community should use their birth sex toilets. Another debate. Now this is open to debate, however, a trans person is allowed to use the toilet of their transitional sex. So whatever they have transitioned to, they don't need to use the birth sex toilet. Class discrimination is the last acceptable form of discrimination. So discriminating against people because of their class background, so whether they're upper class, middle class, lower class, whether they're working class, whether they are benefits class, so whether they live on state benefits or whether they live on money they've earned from their own employment. That is what we mean by class discrimination. It's not the last acceptable form of discrimination because ultimately no form of discrimination is acceptable. So it's not okay to discriminate against people because of their class. This one as well, jokes about women are only jokes. People shouldn't take it so seriously. That is something that we probably hear quite a lot of. You know, people who have got quite a dry, dark sense of humour might think that what they say is acceptable. But joking apart, if you are making an observation or a comment about women that is derogatory, so that is negative to women, then you shouldn't be saying it. It's not about people taking things seriously. It's about the person saying it thinking twice and thinking about the consequences of what they're saying. Some people might take it as a joke, some people might take it seriously. So it is not acceptable to make any derogatory jokes about anybody. Okay, so we now come to the part of the lesson where we're going to be talking about what makes a person prejudiced. So are we really born prejudiced, or is it just human nature? So is it nature or nurture? So do you think people are born with prejudicial views, or do you think it's something that we learn from society and we learn as we grow? Now there's a few theories that have been suggested to offer an insight into this. So first of all, we have something called the unconscious bias. Now this is one explanation as to how our views, beliefs, attitudes and opinions are formed. So the unconscious bias relates to the implicit or unconscious bias happens by our brains making incredibly quick judgments and assessments of people and different situations without us realising. So when you enter into a situation, it is human nature, it is perfectly natural for us to make a judgment and an assessment of the people around us or the situation. And we do it naturally. We don't even realise we're doing it. But what we then do is we start to make judgments and we could act upon those judgments. And that's when it becomes dangerous. So our biases, so the things that we kind of like jump to conclusions about, are influenced by our own experiences, our background, our culture, the environment we live in, We might not even be aware of these views or opinions. And also, we might not be aware of the full impact that they have. So we have to be conscious of our unconscious bias. So we have to be aware of it. In any situation, you will act in a certain way. And the way that you act is normally based on, like I said, your own background, culture, environment, and personal experiences. Being a professional health and social care worker requires you to be able to identify when you're doing this and not do it, because you've got to be aware of the impact and the implications of what you might think and feel and how that might affect other people. So this is all going on when we enter new situations. Another thing that actually happens is this idea of what we call othering. And this refers to the process whereby an individual or a group of people associate a negative characteristic to other individuals, and it sets them apart from others. And then we treat them differently because we feel like they are different. So if you think about it, and this statement here comes from a Croatian journalist, who said that I understand now that nothing but otherness killed Jews. And it began with naming them, and then by reducing them to the other, then everything became possible. So even the worst atrocities, like concentration camps or the slaughtering of civilians throughout the world, particularly in Croatia and Bosnia, all stems down to the fact that they were classed as others. So it's them and us, others. Yeah. So it's really important to be aware of that. Are we actually othering people? Are we saying, oh, they're the other ones, therefore we won't treat them equally, we won't treat them fairly, we won't treat them with equity because they are the others? So very, very important to be aware of this idea of others. So how do we become non-discriminatory? I don't want you to mind map your thoughts in groups, obviously, because we're not in class, but I'm going to talk to you about a few different models and a few different theories that have been suggested which can help us to become non-discriminatory. So the first one is this idea of the cultural competence model. And it's a 4-stage process which we should go through. And if we go through this and we ask ourselves questions at certain points of the process, then we will be able, or hopefully move towards becoming what we call culturally competent. So it starts off with cultural awareness. So the questions we need to be asking ourselves during this cultural awareness section is that we need to be aware of our own values and beliefs. So it's quite me-centred. What are my beliefs? What are my values? What are my biases? What are my stereotypes? So it's a question of who am I? And then we need to be aware of the culture of others. So what are others' values? What are the values and beliefs of other people? What are the norms? What are the customs? What are the traditions? What are their stereotypes? What are their behaviours? So once we understand ourselves and once we understand other people, we then need to develop our cultural knowledge. So this is where we start to analyse, or we break down the knowledge that we have. So how are my values and how are my norms and customs and biases the same or different to others? So it might be that we share the same values as other people, or we have different values to other people. Understanding this helps us move towards becoming more culturally competent and less discriminatory. So we might think to ourselves, right, what additional cultural knowledge or awareness do I need to be able to help me develop? So for example, if I was working with a service user who followed a different religion to myself, we might both value religion, but I may not have the knowledge of my service user's religion. I may have a lot of knowledge about my own religion, but very little knowledge about my service user's religion. So what I would need to do is look at how I develop my knowledge. What do I need to do to be able to learn about my service users' religion? Okay, so what do I need to do? Now, the next thing, once you know what you need to do, you have to then ask yourself if you are open to accepting and respecting those differences. So, this is the cultural sensitivity part. So, it's one thing spotting differences between people, it's another thing kind of identifying what you need to do to understand the culture of another person. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to accept that person. So you've got to think to yourself, yeah, I know what I need to do. Yes, I understand it. But truly, do I accept and respect the differences? Now, you've got to avoid judgments. Be better or worse, be right or wrong. You've got to understand that you're not there to judge somebody as a health and social care professional. You are there to support that person. So if you have different beliefs or values to that person, you cannot let that affect the way you treat them. So you've got to be sensitive to that person's culture. So if that person chooses to do something that you don't agree with, now provided it's not an illegal act, then you have no right to judge that person because they have the right to make their own choices. So once you have got your cultural awareness, you've got your cultural knowledge, you are sensitive to other cultures, we then introduce the idea of this cultural competence. So you have to think about what adjustments, both in the way that you think and in the way that you behave, that you need to make in order to effectively operate in a cultural context. So it's all about, like I said, understanding yourself, understanding the other person, understanding their culture, being sensitive to their culture, and then making adjustments to be able to meet that person's values, that person's beliefs and norms. Not necessarily to accept it, but to not make judgments and to respect that person. So that is the 4-part cycle, which we call the cultural competence model. So that is a really important model for you to think about, and it's going to help you with your continuous professional development as well. Another model is the PCS, Personal, Cultural and Social Model, and this was introduced by Thompson in 2003. So I've abbreviated it to the PCS analysis or the PCS model. And what Thompson suggests is that discrimination and oppression, so remember those key terms we looked at before, operate from different levels. But these levels are all interrelated. Some are obvious, so some are some are overt, so some are very openly obvious, but some might be more covert, so they're not as obvious. An effective action to promote equality and diversity relies on thinking and acting at all levels. So I'll just go through this diagram with you now. So Thompson suggests that discrimination and oppression can happen at a personal level. So we base things on our own personal judgments. So we make a judgment about somebody based on our own personal beliefs. It can also happen from a cultural perspective. So it might be that a person's culture actually leads them to treat people differently. So it's not a personal thing, it's a cultural thing. But then, on the wider part of this diagram is the structural. So discrimination and oppression might happen due to structures that are in place. So for example, let me give you a really, really basic example of this. If you think in parts of the world where women are not allowed to drive cars, that is a form of discrimination and it's oppression, and it's to do with the structures in those societies. It has become part of the law that women are not allowed to drive. That is unacceptable in many societies. So from a structural point of view, that is putting that discrimination and oppression on women. That's then embedded into the culture of the society, and then that also is embedded into the personal beliefs of people because it's what they see going on around them, therefore it becomes a personal belief. So that is the person-centered, the personal, culture and social model. Like I said, you can go back and listen to this video if I'm going too fast or you need to make notes. Now, obviously you are level 4 students, so I would expect you to be doing your own research on these as well. I'm just introducing you to these models. You need to do more research into these yourselves and see how you can apply them to your own work. So let's look at applying this now to a health and social care context. If you're working as a support worker and you feel somebody's being discriminated against, ask yourself 3 questions. Are they being discriminated against because of somebody's personal beliefs? So are you treating them differently because you don't accept that person or you've got a different view to that person? Are you not accepting them, or are they being treated differently due to the culture? Are they living a different culture? Do they experience a different culture than yourself? Or is it the structures? Is something in the organisation or in the law preventing them from taking part in society and achieving the best outcomes? So is it the structures? Is it the law? Is it the organisation that's doing it? Is it the culture, or is it you? So you ask those 3 questions. So from what we've looked at so far, it is clear that in order for us to work in an anti-discriminatory way and to promote equality and diversity, we need to understand ourselves and we need to understand others. To do this, we need to have an awareness of our own culture and the culture of others, and to understand the different levels at which discrimination may be taking place, so personal, cultural, or from a structural perspective. So at the end of this lesson, because I am approaching the end of the lesson now, I want you to watch the TED talk that I've posted on Teams, and that's going to give you an insight into the importance of cultural intelligence. And by cultural intelligence, I mean having the knowledge and the awareness and the understanding of other cultures and the respect and the celebration towards other cultures. Okay, so I'd like you to watch that video for me. It's on for about 15 minutes, but that is still all part of today's lesson, so I want you to watch that. And this is the video now, so there's a link to it, and I'm going to put this PowerPoint on Teams for you as well, so you can click on the link, but I'll actually put the link onto our chat page on Teams. Okay, so we move on now to reflective practice. So most people agree that the only way to develop yourself in respect of equality and diversity is through reflective practice. So reflective practice, as you know, is all about looking back on what you've done, trying to make sense of it, and trying to determine if there was something that you could do differently, or you could do better, or you could change to improve the way that you work. So it might be that you feel that you have got quite strong beliefs towards something. So you might want to go through the reflective practice process to try and look at how you could not necessarily change your beliefs, but make sure that your beliefs and your views don't actually prevent somebody else from achieving the outcomes that they should be achieving. Okay, so your task now, I want you to use Gibbs reflective cycle and write a reflection on how you have used cultural intelligence and the PCS model or theory in your own setting. So that should be about 300 words. So what I'm basically asking you to do is use Gibbs's reflective cycle. So go through that cycle, which I'll just show you again now on this picture here. You describe what happened, you discuss your feelings, you evaluate the situation, you give a description of it, you come to a conclusion, and then you put together an action plan. So I want you to write about a time when you have actually acted in a non-discriminatory and an anti-discriminatory way. So how have you used your cultural intelligence? How have you used the PCS model to be able to treat somebody with respect and dignity that they deserve? And you've actually prevented discrimination from happening. You're going to have to do some research into what Gibbs's reflective cycle is if you don't already know about it. So that's going to take a little bit of time for you to get your head around that. and then I want your 300 words by the end of the week. Okay, so what I would like is for you to stop this video once I've finished and then start working on that. I'm going to be available on Teams to talk to you if you need any help or any support, but please do have a go at doing this on your own, because at the end of the day you are now level 4 learners, so you need to be working on this independently and you need to be doing your research. Ask me if you really need any help, but try your best to find the answers for yourselves. Okay, so that's what I want you to do. So that's a quick review of what we've done today. I'm going to leave it there now, and then I want you to be getting on with that work. And if you need me, like I said, you can contact me on Teams at all, whenever you want. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Speak to you soon. Bye.